Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to my Modern Warfare 2 best settings and optimization guide. I promise this will be the last settings and optimization guide that you will ever need. We're going to be covering everything from the in-game settings to config files to Nvidia settings, and then we're going to finish off with some Windows settings. It's going to help you boost your FPS, lower your input delay, and increase visibility, make it easier to see your enemies, lower visual clutter, and just overall give you a pretty big competitive advantage. So make sure you guys stick around for the entire video to make sure that we can get your game looking and running the best that it possibly can. Now that you guys know what this video is and what we're going to be doing, let's get into the first thing, which is going to be our game settings. So let's just go into our settings, and the first thing that we're going to cover is our graphics tab. For display mode, you always want this on full screen exclusive. There's no reason to be using anything else. This is going to give you the best FPS and input delay that you could have. For display monitor, just make sure you choose whatever monitor that you're using. Display adapter, choose whatever your GPU is. Screen refresh rate, make sure this is set to the highest possible. For me, it's going to be 360 hertz. For display resolution, we're going to set this to whatever our monitor is using. I'm using a 1080p monitor, so I have it set to 1920 by 1080. Some of you may have 1440p monitors, so set that to 2560 by 1440. Just make sure it's set to our native resolution. As far as dynamic resolution goes, make sure this is set to off. Unless you have a really bad GPU, then you could experiment with this a little bit, but for most people, just leave it set to off. For aspect ratio, make sure this is set to the aspect ratio of your monitor. So if you're playing 1920 by 1080, it's going to be 16 by 9. Always turn vsync off. You don't want either of these options on. Vsync just causes unnecessary input delay. For custom frame rate limit, we're going to set this to custom, and for our gameplay frame rate, we're going to set it to 300, and for a menu, we're going to set it to 120, just so that our GPU isn't running full blast while we're in the menus, and it's going to give it a little bit of a break and some time to cool down between games. And then out of focus custom frame rate limit, I just have this set to 30. For display gamma, if you're on a monitor, make sure this is set to 2.2 sRGB. It's going to look the best. And for brightness, I have mine turned up just a little bit. I do this in most games, but in this game, it's pretty important to turn this brightness up just a little bit. I feel like 60 is a really good middle ground, but once you start going to 70 and above, it starts to get washed out really bad. And if you go too low, those shadows are going to start to get really dark. So 60 is what I found personally to be the best middle ground to get those shadows to brighten up a little bit, but not washing the game out too much. Focus mode, make sure that's turned off, and make sure high dynamic range is turned off. Now we're going to head over into the quality tab. So for quality preset, what I recommend most of you doing for now is setting this to minimum, and then I'll go through each setting and show you guys what's the best. So first, we want to make sure our render resolution is set to 100. It's really important that this is always set to 100. This is going to make sure that the game is displaying your native resolution. If you go above that, your game will be rendering at a higher resolution. It may look a little bit better, but you're going to lose a lot of performance for not much benefit in visual clarity. And if you start to go lower, it's going to render your game in a lower resolution, which is going to make things look really blurry, but you will get an FPS boost. So if you have a lower end PC, turning that down a little bit could help you if you're not getting the frames that you want. But most people just want to leave this at 100. Now, as far as upscaling goes, most people in this game use Fidelity FX CAS, but even at 100%, the game is still a little bit blurry to me. I don't know if it's just because I really don't like the forced anti-aliasing in this game, but even when this is all the way up, it still just doesn't look right. So what I found works best for me personally is Nvidia image scaling. Make sure your image scaling preset is set to native, and I like my sharpness to be anywhere from 0.5 to 0.8. Now keep in mind that this is going to make the game look a lot sharper and not as good as it would with the Fidelity CAS sharpening, but in terms of overall clarity and sharpness of the game, this is just miles better, and there isn't much of an FPS difference at all. So if you guys are still feeling like it's a little bit hard to see even though you have the Fidelity sharpening turned all the way up, try this out. I've told a few different people about this and they said it makes a big difference. I can't go back to the other one now after using this. The game just looks so much sharper. And for anti-aliasing, make sure you have this set to Filmic SMAA. Now this will affect performance just a tiny amount, not much at all. I'm sure a lot of you have already noticed, but on certain walls in the game, there are these little black specks and dots everywhere that move on the wall. You can kind of see it in this picture right here. This left one has a lot of these black dots on the side of the car. Setting this to Filmic will help get rid of most of those, and it'll just make your game look a lot more clear, so I'd recommend using Filmic. As far as anti-aliasing quality goes, this one doesn't really matter. Make sure this is set to low. Video memory scale, if you guys have a good card, you can bump this up a little bit. I have a 3080 Ti, so I just put it to the max. If you guys are crashing, you can lower that back down a little bit. For details and textures, you want to set most of these to the absolute lowest that you can go. There are really only a couple of settings that I'd recommend turning up to make your game look better without sacrificing FPS and clarity, and that's going to be your texture resolution. I like to play them very low just because it gives me the best FPS, and I don't really care about textures too much, but if that is something you guys do care about, set this to normal, or if you have a good card, set it to high, and it's going to make your game look a lot better. But just keep in mind that it is going to affect your FPS just a little bit. And same thing for your texture filter. If you do want your game to look a little bit better, set this to the highest you can. This is barely going to affect FPS at all, probably not even at all, but I don't really care about it, so I just leave it to the absolute lowest, and I have it even lower in my config file, which we'll talk about later. Nearby level of detail, set that to low. Distant level of detail, low. Clutter draw distance, short. Particle quality, set this to low. I know in other games you wanted to have this set to high, but in this game it doesn't matter. It doesn't do the same thing, so just keep this set to low. This will give you better FPS. Same thing with particle quality level. Make sure this is very low. Bullet impacts and sprays. If you like seeing the bullet holes in the wall, you can turn this on. It doesn't have an effect on performance. I don't really like it, so I just keep it off. Shader quality, low. Tessellation, you could turn this up a little bit. It's not going to have too big of a hit to your FPS, but I just don't mind it, so I keep it off. Terrain memory, just set that to minimum. On-demand texture streaming, you want this off. Streaming quality, low. Volumetric quality, low. Deferred physics quality, off. Water caustics, off. Shadow map resolution, make sure this is very low. Screen space shadows, off. Spot shadow quality, low. Spot cache, you could turn this up a little bit if you have a high-end card, but just leave it on low, just because I don't really notice a difference between any of the settings. Particle lighting, set that to low. Ambient occlusion, make sure that's off. Screen space reflections, off. Static reflection quality, low. Weather grid volumes, off. Nvidia reflex, you want this either on or on plus boost. If you guys have a really good card, I'd recommend trying on plus boost, but if you notice that your game is stuttering a little bit, set it to on and that should fix it, but you do want it to at least on. Depth of field, off. World motion blur, off. Weapon motion blur, off. And film grain to 0. And I know a lot of you guys are thinking, look, why are we just setting all the quality settings to low? I want my game to look good too, but the thing about this game is it's already so hard to run and it's so intense on your hardware that you need every bit of FPS that you can get. I'm running a Ryzen 5800X and a 3080 Ti, and I can barely even hold 200 FPS in this game, even with the lowest settings. So that just goes to show how important that lowering your settings is in this game and getting every bit of FPS that you can. But enough rambling about that. Now let's head over to the view tab. For field of view, most people want to play on 120. It's going to make your movement feel so much better. Going to feel like you're moving faster. I feel like it makes it a little bit easier to aim for me, and it just really improves the gameplay experience. However, if you guys sit kind of far away from your monitor, you could turn that down a little bit to 100, 110. ADS field of view, you always want this on affected. This will make it so that when you ADS, you're still on that high FOV. This one is a pretty common one that I see get overlooked a lot of the time. I know having the weapon field of view on wide looks a lot better. It makes the gun more zoomed out, like it's a higher FOV. I know it looks a lot better, but narrow is going to be better because it's taking up less of your center screen. And in this game, you want as much of your center screen to be available as possible. Third person field of view, you want this on the highest on 90. Vehicle field of view, you can set this to wide. Vehicle field of view isn't as important. First person camera movement, set this to least 50%. Same thing with third person camera movement, least 50%. Third person ADS transition, I just prefer third person ADS, so that's what I have it as. So that about covers it for the in-game graphics. Now let's head over to the audio tab. For audio mix, there are a couple that I like. It's going to be headphones and headphones bass boost. I thought the headphones bass boost would be too much, but I actually hear really good with the headphones bass boost. So try it out for yourself. If you don't like it, go back to the headphones, but those are the only two that I'd recommend for now. For master volume, I usually play on 50, but I just have it set down to 10 for the video purposes. Music volume, you want to set this to 0, unless you really do care about that music, which I don't think many people do. To me, it's just kind of annoying, so I have it set to 0. Dialogue volume, you want to turn this down a little bit. I have it down to 40, just so that those in-game callouts aren't screaming in my ear. For effects volume, you always want to leave this on 100% and adjust accordingly in your master volume. Hit marker volume, turn this down a little bit. I have mine to 30. The rest of these are going to be mostly personal preference and also dependent on your PC. Just a couple of things. Make sure mono audio is turned off. I have all my subtitles turned off just because I don't want to see those in game. I feel like they're kind of distracting. Voice chat volume, turn that down a little bit. The voice chat in this game is so loud. Having it at 100 and people are screaming in their mics is going to make your ears bleed, so I have mine on 10%. If you guys are having trouble with your microphone getting picked up, just come in here and pick whatever you're using for your microphone. I like to have Juggernaut music turned off, and I also like to have reduced tinnitus sound turned on so that when you get flashbanged, it's not going to be as harsh on your ears. Now we'll head over into the interface tab real quick, and most of these are just going to be personal preference, but there are a few that I want to talk about. First thing that I want to talk about a little bit is color customization. Now I have mine on filter 2 with the color filter target of both and a world and interface color intensity of 100. But what I did is I came in here to my enemy color and I turned the brightness and saturation up all the way just so it's easier to see them. And another thing that I just was told that helped a lot is turning my teammate and party brightness down a lot for those rare instances when you have a teammate way off in the distance and an enemy pops up up in front of you, but you still see that teammate nameplate icon above their head. This is going to help with that a little bit because it's not going to be so bright and glaring. As far as enemy colors go that I'd recommend this super bright red. Yellow is also really good, and another one I'd recommend is probably pink. Those are the only three colors. Anything else is just going to not be bright enough and it's not going to catch your attention, but those three are really good. For vertical and horizontal HUD bounds, you want both of these set to 0%. The reason for this is because when this setting is turned up and on the edges of your screen, that's even further that your eye has to go to look at the minimap, which in a lot of situations could get you killed. So having that minimap closer to the center of your screen and allowing yourself to save those few milliseconds could help you win a lot more fights. Minimap shape, you want this to square because you can see more. Minimap rotation, just keep this on because it's easier to track the minimap. Crosshairs on, hit marker visuals on, damage based hit markers, turn that on. Player names, you want this set to abbreviated just so you don't see the clan tag above the person's name. It just starts to become a little bit too much clutter. Telemetry, make sure this is set to custom. Then we're going to go into it and you want to turn your FPS counter on and your server latency on. Skip introduction movie, make sure that's set to on. Center dot, this is another important one. Make sure this is set to on. And center dot scale, I just have it on default. Larger and largest are just a little bit too big for me. Next, we'll head over into the keyboard and mouse tab and I'll show you guys my sensitivity and my keybinds and all that. Keep in mind that a lot of this is just personal preference, but I'll show you guys everything that I have. For mouse sensitivity, I play on 1600 DPI 2.6, which if I had to guess would be roughly about 33 centimeters per 360. For those of you looking to get started out, if you're playing on 1600 DPI, I'd recommend anywhere from 2.0 to 3.0, or if you're on 800 DPI, that would be anywhere from 4.0 to 6.0. I just feel like that's a really good range for this game. For ADS sensitivity multiplier, I have this set to 1.0. If you feel like that's a little bit fast, you could turn that down to about 0.9, but 1.0 usually feels the best for me. ADS sense multiplier focus, this is only for when you're focused in, like with a sniper. I have it turned down just a little bit just because that feels good to me. ADS sensitivity type, you want this set to relative at all times. It's just going to make that transition between ADS and hipfire a lot more fluid. For monitor distance coefficient, I usually just keep this on 1.33, just because if you're playing on a 16:9 monitor, this is the right distance coefficient for that. Custom sensitivity per zoom, you could turn this on if you feel like snipers or something are a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast. Vertical aim axis, don't mess with any of that, just keep it standard. And for mouse calibration, we're going to make sure acceleration, filtering, and smoothing are all off. So set this to 0, set this to 0, and make sure that's set to off. For gameplay, a lot of this is personal preference, but there are a couple that I want to talk about. First thing is automatic sprint. You want this off just because in this game you have to play so much slower because that ADS transition time from sprinting is so high and it's so slow that you don't always want to be sprinting like you were in other Call of Duties. So make sure that's off. Share, slide, and dive inputs, I like to have these on independent just because having them set to one key will make it a little bit harder to do what you want to. You might accidentally crouch when you want to prone, vice versa. So make sure this is set to independent and you have separate keybinds for those. For ADS behavior, I just have this set to hold, but that's about it. The rest of these are personal preference. Just find what works for you. And here are my keybinds. None of these are really special. None of these really make too much of a difference like they would in certain games. The only thing that really sticks out to me is that I have jump also on scroll wheel. I have my prone set to Z. My crouch and slide is set to control. My melee is on middle mouse button. Ping is on my mouse thumb button. But honestly, that's about it. The rest of it is going to be whatever works for you guys and whatever you guys find comfortable. Next thing we're going to do is head over into our account and network tab, and then we're going to scroll down just a little bit, and dismemberment and gore effects, we're just going to turn that off, and that might help save us a couple FPS here and there. But that's going to cover it for our in-game settings. Now we're going to head over into our config file where we can boost FPS and visibility even further. Just real quick before we head over into the config file, I just want to show you a couple of things that we can do in Steam. First thing we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to go to properties, and then in our general tab we want to make sure that we uncheck enable Steam overlay in game and use desktop game theater. Make sure both of these are unchecked, and then once we've done that, we're going to head over into our local files. We're going to go to browse, and then once we're in here, we're going to find cod.exe. We're going to right click it, go to properties, and in the compatibility tab we want to make sure you check disable full screen optimizations, and then in change high DPI settings, this one doesn't really matter. I still like to do it anyways just because I've been doing it forever. It's gonna be override high DPI scaling. Hit OK, hit apply, and then hit OK. Now we're going to go into our actual config options file, and that's going to be in our documents. So once we're in documents, we're going to head to Call of Duty. We're going to go to players, and then options 3 cod 22 is where we'll find the file. Now yours might not pop up like this. All that you need to do is right click, go to open with, and then notepad, and then it will open up and look a little bit something like this. So for the most part, we'll have everything set because we went through all of our game settings first, but there are quite a few things that I want to cover in here to help boost your FPS even further. So as far as all this audio goes, this is all going to be whatever you set it to in game. We won't have to mess with this at all. Most of your display settings will will also be correct because we did all the stuff in game first. The first thing I want to talk to you about is async compute. Make sure that is set to false. I noticed a very large increase in FPS when I set this to false. Display mode, it should be set, but make sure that's set to full screen. Make sure it's set to whatever monitor you're using. Refresh rate, resolution, like I said, that should all be set. Sometimes my resolution resets. I don't know why it does that, but when it does, just come in here and reset that back to 100. We're going to keep scrolling down. We're going to keep scrolling down a little bit. Film grain, you want to set this to 0. This will just make sure that there's no film grain being applied in game. There is another one below this though that you do want on, but we'll get to that in just a second. We're going to keep scrolling down a little bit and we're going to go to clutter max distance. Make sure this is set to the lowest at 100. Same thing for corpse culling threshold. Make sure this is set to the lowest at 0.5. Bird physics, make sure that's on low quality. Dynamic scene resolution, make sure that's false. Dynamic resolution target, 0. These will probably be off by default, but just make sure that they're still off. Strength of filmic visual noise filter. This is the one that you want to set to 1. Like I described a little bit with the filmic anti-aliasing, this will help a little bit with the black dots on the walls and it doesn't affect performance too much. GTAO quality, make sure that's low. Model distance quality, you want that on base. Model LOD quality, make sure that's base. Particle lighting quality, make sure that's set to 0. Particle quality, make sure that's very low. You want your particle resolution to be true and persistent damage layer true. Reflection probe half resolution true. And reflection probe lighting, make sure that's 1. And a lot of these, just make sure they're set to the absolute lowest, you know, off, 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 low. I don't know why this one keeps resetting, but we're going to put it back to very low. Shadow cast, 0. Shadow quality, low. Static sun shadow resolution, make sure that's set to 0. Your subdivision level, make sure that's 0. Sun shadow cascade, make sure that's low. Tessellation, 0 off. Unless you wanted it on like we had in game, then just leave that alone. Same thing with texture filter. I have mine set to the lowest, which is texture filter linear. Do not set it to texture filter nearest because that will give you blocky textures in game and it'll make it even harder to see through things like smoke and explosions for almost no performance increase. So linear is the lowest that you want to go. If you guys do want a little bit better visuals, you can crank that up. You can go pretty much to the highest with no performance impact. Texture quality is another one that I recommended to turn up if you want a little bit better looking game. 3 is the lowest, 0 is the highest. UI quality, make sure that's set to whatever your native resolution is. So mine's 1080p. For use large physical textures, make sure that's false. Volumetric quality, you want that low. Water caustics, you want that off. Weather grid, you want that off. World streaming quality, low. Now for the render worker count, and keep in mind that I have an 8 core 16 thread CPU. The best performance that I found was the number of my cores plus or minus 2 or 3. If I start to go any lower than that, I notice a performance impact, and if I start to go any higher than that, I notice a performance impact. So this is a setting that you'll have to mess around with a little bit. I found 11 worked the best for me, and I have an 8 core CPU. So if you guys have a 6 core CPU, you could try 6, 7, 8, even 9 threads for your render worker count, and just try that in the benchmark and see what gives you the highest FPS. For video memory scale, I just keep that on 0.9. I tried a bunch of higher settings and I didn't notice too much of a performance boost, so I just have it set to the highest that you can set in game, which is 0.9. But if you guys are noticing crashing or if your game's stuttering, lower that down a little bit, especially if you have a low-end card. You probably want to lower that. So once we're done with that, we're going to come up here and hit save, and you actually don't have to put this to read only. Next thing that I want to talk to you guys about are my Nvidia control panel settings. So we're just going to go in here to Nvidia control panel. First thing, adjust image settings with preview. We're going to click here on use my preference and we're going to set that to performance. Next, we're going to head down to manage 3D settings, and here are all of my settings. You know, you can copy all those in if you want to, but the most important ones that we're going to need is make sure image scaling is off. All of these other settings right here, we're going to make sure those are off. Low latency mode, I have it set to ultra. Max frame rate, turn that off. I like to choose my GPU, so I have a 3080 Ti, so I picked that. Power management mode, you want to set that to prefer maximum performance. Preferred refresh rate, you always want the highest available. Texture filtering quality, high performance. Copy these other settings if you want to. Triple buffering, make sure that's off. Vertical sync, you want that off. And you can copy the rest of these too. Next thing we're going to do is go to adjust desktop color settings, and we're going to turn the digital vibrance up a little bit. I like to play on 70. I noticed that brightens the game up just enough and makes it just colorful enough, and the colors aren't clipping. So I feel like 70 to 80 is a pretty good middle ground for most people. Next, we're going to go to adjust video color settings, and we're going to come over here. We're going to hit the advanced tab and make sure our dynamic range is set to full. Then we just want to go down here and hit apply. So if you're on the most recent up-to-date Nvidia driver, it'll probably be 52647, but a lot of people, including myself, had a lot of problems with this driver on the game, and even older drivers. What I noticed, on top of just low FPS and a bad gameplay experience in general, I was getting a lot of flickering going on my screen. But just recently, about 4 or 5 days ago, they released the hotfix driver, which isn't openly available yet. You have to look it up, but they did address the issue where the flashing can be seen seen in the game. And this driver here not only fixed that, but also gave me a pretty good FPS boost. So for those of you who aren't on this Nvidia driver version yet, I'd strongly recommend to download this one. And for those of you on AMD, I don't have an AMD card, so I'm not too knowledgeable about it. However, this is the most recent AMD driver, and in the release notes, it even says that they have support for Modern Warfare 2. So if you guys aren't on this version yet, I probably recommend upgrading to that. I'll leave links down below. So I'll leave a link to this program down in the description below. It's going to be the Nvidia profile inspector. So we're just going to open that up, and then we want to come up here to the top right corner where it says show unknown settings, and we want to make sure that's checked. And then we're going to scroll down a little bit until we find these three settings right here: F00BA, F00BB, and F00FF. For BA and BB, we just want to hit this arrow and make sure that the battlefield setting is checked for both of them. So make sure it's battlefield on both of these. And then for F00FF, same thing, make sure it's the battlefield setting. And then all we need to do is come up here, hit apply changes, and then we're done. Keep in mind that you will have to do this every single time after you update your drivers. So we're going to come down to our Windows search bar, and we're going to type in graphics. And then we're going to go to our graphics settings. First thing we need to do is make sure hardware accelerated GPU scheduling is turned on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to find this Call of Duty HQ, and we're going to set this to high performance. And to do that, we're going to come here and click browse. And then for most of you, it's going to be in your Steam library, or if you have it on Battle.net, it'll be wherever you downloaded it on Battle.net. But if you're on Steam, it's really easy to find out where it is. We're just going to go into Steam. We're going to go to library. We'll right click Modern Warfare 2, and then we'll go to browse local files. And then it should pop up and show you exactly where that directory is. And then you can just copy. We'll head back over into our graphics settings, and then you just paste that up here, and it'll take you directly to the folder. Then you just want to click on cod.exe. We'll hit add. It says mine's already been added, but it'll be this one right here, Call of Duty HQ. We're going to go here. We're going to click that. We're going to click options and make sure that's set to high performance. And then in this search bar, we're going to type in game mode, go to game mode settings, make sure game mode is turned on. Then we'll go to Xbox game bar, make sure that's turned off. And then that about covers it for all of the Windows settings. Just a couple of things to keep in mind. If you want the best performance that you can get out of your PC, it's so important to have minimal background tasks and also overlays. The more of those that you have going on while you're trying to play, the more it's going to take up your FPS. So things like Steam overlay, Discord overlay, recording softwares like Shadowplay. Once you start adding a bunch of those things on top of each other, it's going to result in a pretty large FPS hit. Same thing with background tasks, like Chrome, Spotify, you have a download going in the background, Discord going. The more stuff that you have going on in your PC, the more it's going to eat up your FPS. So just be conscious of that. But yeah, guys, that's going to cover it for today's video. Remember that if these settings do help you, please leave a like and a comment, and maybe even consider subscribing. It helps the video and the channel out a ton. If you guys have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. If you guys want to see more of me, or if you want to ask me any questions anywhere else, links to all my social medias are down in the description. I really do hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.